C.S. Lewis, the renowned author, experienced intense grief, anxiety, pain, and fear like all of us do. Today, I'm going to read from his book, A Grief Observed, that he penned after he lost his wife in great love. We will explore the root cause of these negative emotions, and then I'm going to give you 5 practical ways derived from evidence-based science of positive psychology and ancient wisdom to help you dissolve these negative emotions so you can find some sanity in these uncertain times. Join me on this journey today. No one ever told me that grief felt so like fear. I'm not afraid, but the sensation is like being afraid. The same fluttering in the stomach, the same restlessness, the yawning. I keep on swallowing. At other times, it feels like being mildly drunk or concussed. There is a sort of invisible blanket between the world and me. I find it hard to take in what anyone says, or perhaps hard to want to take it in. It is so uninteresting. Yet I want the others to be about me. I dread the moments when the house is empty. If only they would talk to one another and not to me. This is the beginning of the book called A Grief Observed, written by C.S. Lewis some time ago. The book was not intended to be published. This was his journal that he wrote to himself while grieving the loss of his great love, his equal, another writer, his wife. They were married for just about 4 years when she passed of cancer. In fact, he knew that she had cancer. When they met, she was in the hospital. Despite that, the love between them was immense. And when she passed on, the grief was immense too. The situation that we face today is not dissimilar to what Jack, as he was lovingly called, faced. Now, Jack was a very compassionate man, but suffered a lot of loss during his life. He lost his pet dog, Jaxie, and he actually named himself Jaxie. From that came the name Jack. He lost his mother at a young age, and his father was, let's just say, eccentric and not very forgiving. And he was himself going through a lot of pain of osteoporosis and other physical conditions when he lost his wife. So the amount of emotions he must have been going through were like a storm, a perfect storm coming from all sides. And today we find ourselves in a similar situation. We are captured in our homes. We are captured in our minds. There's fear of being infected by this silent enemy. We cannot do the things we love to do. We don't have jobs. We are worried about our paychecks. The grief, the anxiety, the fear are all mixed together. And because these emotions are like a cocktail that we are all experiencing right now, there's an article that was just published in Harvard Business Review where they interviewed a gentleman named David Kessler. Now, those of you who don't know David Kessler, he is not a stranger to grief. He, in fact, authored the book with Elizabeth Kübler-Ross called On Grief and Grieving, the 5 stages of dealing with loss. That became the standard for dealing with grief in the world of psychology. It's called the Kübler-Ross model. David spent many years dealing with all kinds of adversities around the globe, with Red Cross, in the hospital systems, in hospice, and he came in intimate contact with grief all the time. And then he lost his son, a 21-year-old son, about 3.5 years ago. Following that immense amount of grief, he published the 6th stage of grief, called meaning. And in our discussion today, we're going to try to figure out how to dissolve this fear, this anxiety. And I'll give you 5 ways that are tested empirically, scientifically, and experientially, from ancient wisdom to modern science, that have been proven to be durable in dealing with grief and fear. But before we get there, let's hear what David Kessler had to say to this interviewer about what we are feeling today. He called it anticipatory grief. This is the anticipation of what could happen to us in this crisis, what is already happening to us and how it could get worse. That feeling of fear and anxiety is essentially from the lack of control, feeling absolutely helpless against this invisible enemy. And there's a Italian widow who lost her husband to this crisis. She is in her late 70s. Her husband was in the early 80s. And when somebody asked her what she felt, she said, "I don't feel sadness and I don't feel disappointment. I feel impotence against this silent enemy." And I think that's the essence, the foundation of grief, of fear, is this lack of control, that we may in fact become irrelevant. So the question that comes up is, how do you manage it? What do you do about it? And that's what we're going to discuss in the next few minutes, to go through 5 strategies that can help us deal with and dissolve some of this grief and fear. Now, it's easier said than done, I acknowledge it, because it's very difficult to place myself in the shoes of those who are currently going through these stages of grief. You know, you could have planned a wedding that you had to postpone, a birthday party. Somebody may be going through a divorce right at this time. You may be estranged from your loved one and feeling remorse. I could name 1,000 other ways how we could be feeling this challenge, which is multiplied 100 times because of what's going on around us. Because of the fact that we are encaged in our homes, let alone being encaged in our own mind. So how does this anticipatory grief express itself physiologically and psychologically? You may call it simply stress. There is the episodic stress that evolutionarily we are built to deal with. If there is a snake you see on the street, you run away, the flight or fight mechanism that we all have. In fact, there's a wonderful book on episodic versus chronic risk called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. It's written by Robert Sapolsky. He is a professor at Stanford. There's a very important point he makes in it, that human beings haven't been designed to have the snake chase us forever. So the reason zebras don't get ulcers is because the event of a tiger chasing them to eat them happens and is over. Either they become food for the tiger or they escape, but the event is over. But this event is creating stress not only day after day, but week after week, and potentially months after months. And our bodies are not designed for this elongated stretch of chronic stress. It can cause havoc physiologically and psychologically. One of the biggest challenges in this time is insomnia, the lack of sleep. Insomnia and stress are very closely related. In fact, it can become a very vicious cycle. If you don't get enough sleep, you're more stressed. If you're more stressed, you can't sleep. And that just continues to snowball. And the effect on our body, on our heart, on our liver, on our lungs, on every aspect of our physiology, but most importantly on our mental health, can take a huge toll. So you ask, how can we dissolve this fear and anxiety? Well, I'm not that smart or wise. I depend on these books to actually get that wisdom. So I'm going to read you something from one of my favorite writers, Thich Nhat Hanh. And this particular book is called The Heart of Buddha's Teaching. Embrace your suffering, smile to it, and discover the source of happiness that is right there within it. Buddhas and Bodhisattvas suffer too. The difference between them and us is that they know how to transform their suffering into joy and compassion. Like organic gardeners, they do not discriminate in favor of the flowers or against the garbage. They know how to transform garbage into flowers. Don't throw away your suffering. Touch your suffering. Face it directly, and your joy will become deeper. You know that suffering and joy are both impermanent. Learn the art of cultivating joy. So to learn the art of cultivating joy, I went to another source. And that source is aptly called the Book of Joy. It's written by His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Desmond Tutu, two people who are well known to all of us. And this is their recipe, one of the recipes in this amazing book of how to cultivate joy. Why be unhappy about something if it can be remedied? And what is the use of being unhappy if it cannot be remedied? In this short teaching is the profound essence of the Dalai Lama's approach to life. It was at the root of his stunning ability to accept the reality of his exile without, as the Archbishop put it, being morose. Once we can see life in its wider perspective, once we're able to see our role in its drama, and with some degree of humility, and once we are able to laugh at ourselves, we then come to the fourth and final quality of mind, which is the ability to accept our life in all its pain, imperfection, and beauty. Acceptance, it must be pointed out, is the opposite of resignation and defeat. The Archbishop did not accept the inevitability of apartheid, but he did accept its reality. We are meant to live in joy, the Archbishop explained. This does not mean that life will be easy or painless. It means that we can turn our faces to the wind and accept that this is the storm we must pass through. The acceptance of reality is the only place from which change can begin. The question, he had said, is not, how do we escape it? The question is, how can we use this as something positive? Acceptance, whether we believe in God or not, allows us to move into the fullness of joy. It allows us to engage with life on its own terms, rather than rail against the fact that life is not as we would wish. It allows us not to struggle against the day-to-day current. The Dalai Lama had told us that stress and anxiety come from our expectations of how life should be. When we are able to accept that life is how it is, not as we think it should be, we are able to ease the ride, to go from that bumpy axle, dukkha, or sadness, with all its suffering, stress, anxiety, and dissatisfaction, to the smooth axle, or sukha, or happiness, with its greater ease, comfort, and happiness. These books have an incredible amount of wisdom. And the question is, how do we translate that into actions into our daily life? So here are the 5 ways in which I believe we can manage this really quite unprecedented time period to deal with the anticipatory grief that David Kessler talks about, to deal with this cocktail of guilt, sometimes shame, sometimes anger, sometimes frustration and sadness and anxiety and stress, to dissolve this as much as possible. Here's the first way of how to manage this anxiety. And I'm going to start with where I left, which is acceptance. Now, acceptance has a few parts to it. In order for us to accept what's happening to us, the first thing we have to do is recognize that this is real and not hide from it. Some of us still exist in that stage, the 5 stages of dealing with loss, which is natural, which is human, and that's denial. So recognizing that I'm suffering, that this is happening to me, is the first step. Then being emotionally aware of how you feel inside. What does this do to you? What does it do to your mind? How does it feel in your body? Where does it sit? Does it sit in your stomach? Does it sit in your chest? Do your legs feel weak? Becoming emotionally honest with yourself on how your body is processing this grief and this stress, this anxiety, this fear. The third part of acceptance is recognizing that this is not your fault. It never was. It's not anyone's fault. This is where, as the Dalai Lama said, life is. It's not because someone did something that this misery came upon us. We may believe that to be the case, but it is not your fault. And the fourth thing about acceptance is the common humanity. Knowing that you are not alone in this, that others are with you on this journey. In fact, the entire world is going through this journey together. So common humanity is an important part of acceptance. Just that step alone to deal with anxiety and fear is a huge step in terms of being vulnerable and having the ability to process whatever it is you're feeling, giving yourself the permission and the right to feel it, and not letting others affect how you feel. Cry if you want to cry. Be angry if you want to be angry. Obviously, don't hurt someone. There's a way to process all of these feelings. In fact, Buddha and Thich Nhat Hanh and all of the enlightened souls have talked about the seeds inside us of anger, of pain, of suffering, of lust, of greed, of ego. They all exist in us. The question is, when they rise, do we acknowledge them? And more importantly, do we water them, or do we tell them to go sit back down? Sometimes it's necessary to water them. Accepting what's happening is like watering them, and recognizing it's okay to feel this way. So the second step is managing this anxiety. How do you control it? And I'm going to make it really simple for you. This is something that the corporate world and individuals are all excited about, but I'll break it down in something incredibly simple and easy to exercise. It's called mindfulness. You've heard about it, right? There's all kinds of mindfulness meditations out there. But this is really quite simple because you're by yourself and you can do these things fairly easily. The first way is mindfully walking in a forest or grove of trees or in nature. There is something called forest bathing that is very well known in the Japanese culture. And now science tells us that when people walk mindfully in a forest where they listen to the birds, the leaves rustling in the wind, the smell of the forest, the pine leaves that may have fallen down, if it has just rained recently, the fresh smell of the earth, that it actually enhances our immunity. It increases the good stuff in our body to deal with stress. It activates our parasympathetic nervous system, which releases all kinds of beautiful neurotransmitters that help us relax. Some of you may naturally experience that, but there is science behind it now. So mindful walking in a forest or in nature is one way to do it. Second, mindful eating. When you sit down to eat, you'll find that it'll make a whole world of a difference in the taste of what you're eating if you eat it mindfully. So when you're eating your lunch or dinner next time, take a moment that when you take a bite, just savor that. Enjoy the way the food is breaking down in your mouth, the way your enzymes are turning carbohydrates into sugar, how it turns sweet. Even if you're having a drink, a glass of wine, a scotch, whatever it is, smell it, drink it, taste it, and let it go down your throat mindfully. And you'll find that just that simple act alone really helps us manage our anxiety because we are mindfully engaged with the present moment. Mindful reading and mindful writing. When you read something, like I just read from the book, try and read slowly to absorb what you want to absorb. The goal is not to finish the book or a chapter. My daughter chides me that I never finish a book. The reason I don't get to finish a book is because if I find a chapter that's interesting, I go back to it time and time again to really absorb what the author meant to say. My interpretations are different from the author, but I really want to mindfully understand what the meaning of that paragraph was, like the ones that I just read. Mindful praying. When you sit in prayer, those of you who are religious, there is incredible amount of evidence that prayer creates, in fact, not just longevity, but it reduces our fear of death. This is recorded in science. Meditation does the same thing. But if you're not into religion or God, you can achieve the same result by being mindful in the present moment. Forest bathing, for example, or watching a sunrise or a sunset mindfully is just like meditation, is just like prayer. The same kind of reaction happens in your body when you actually do that. And it's amazing that if you recall even a beautiful moment that happened in the past, your brain actually does not know that it happened in the past. It imagines as if it's happening right now. And that's why it creates the same kind of reactions in your body that happened when you experienced it. Now, when it was grief or fear, the same chemicals will get created if you feel that constantly. That's why this chronic stress for over a long time is so harmful for us, because your brain doesn't know that the event is not happening. that it happened in the past, but it thinks it's happening now because you keep thinking about it. And you can reverse that. That's the beautiful part, that you can actually reverse that process by shifting the frame of your mind. So mindfulness in simple ways, mindful laughing. What was the last time we laughed? In India, there are people who do laughter yoga. And when you walk early in the morning, there's hundreds of people, groups of people standing in parks and lawns, in these squares in their congested blocks of homes, and simply laughing, forced laughing. After about 5 minutes, you'll be going crazy laughing on your own because it releases these amazing amounts of hormones and neurotransmitters. It creates this activation of your vagus nerve, which runs down from here into your entire system, that actually causes your system to become balanced, to actually get to a place where you feel peace. That's why they say laughter is the best medicine. There is a scientific reason behind it, and it comes from ancient wisdom. This is not anything new. And number 3 is related to mindfulness, but it is very specific. You will need a journal and you'll need a pen. You can even use a computer if you like. It's called the 3 blessings exercise. Those of you who practice gratitude would know it well. But most of the 3 blessings exercises that you hear about from people who are projecting it out, they miss one very important step. And that's perhaps more important than writing the 3 blessings themselves. So the exercise goes like this. You think about the last 24 hours, and you think about 3 things, 3 blessings that you're thankful for, and you write them down. Most people will stop there. Most people will tell you that's your gratitude journal. Just write things that you're thankful for. Now that's very important. But the other half of it is writing why you believe that happened to you. The 4th is just as powerful and perhaps even more. And that is self-compassion. There are 2 people that I specifically like to mention here, Kristin Neff and Chris Germer. Kristin Neff has been writing and researching about self-compassion for many years, more than a decade, I think about 15 years or so. And Chris Germer and Kristin created 2 separate schools, but the one that I found has a lot of information. Both of them do. One is called selfcompassion.org. Go to that. The other is called Center for Mindful Self-Compassion. In fact, Kristin Neff wrote this wonderful book called Self-Compassion, and it has a very personal account of her experience with self-compassion and how she dealt with her own incapacities, her own imperfections, her own fears and anxieties, and her own what she considered to be weaknesses or shortcomings, and how self-compassion helped her deal with it. Now, while there are incredible number of benefits of self-compassion that I could go on listing, the most important one is sleep. Self-compassion will help you sleep at night because it again relaxes your body. It activates your parasympathetic nervous system, which releases all kinds of transmitters. You now know the story, that it creates a reduction in the level of stress hormones in your body. And this has been scientifically noted and recorded. So there's tremendous number of studies around being compassionate to yourself. In fact, people will go as far as saying that be incredibly selfish about self-compassion, because before you can even give compassion to others, you need to have it for yourself. Like they say, how can you give something to someone when you don't have it yourself? So self-compassion is an incredible antidote to fear and anxiety. Now, simple ways you can practice self-compassion to break the cycle of stress and sleep is listed. Many exercises are listed in that book, Self-Compassion. So I'm not going to go through what all you could do. Suffice it to say, you could even do a Google search and find exercises on self-compassion, and you'll find tremendous number of things you can do, simple ones, and you don't need people around you. You do this by yourself. Finally, the 5th one. Now, this is a tough one. When you are embroiled in this day-to-day challenge and this fight, this is about focusing on the future. Now, some people will tell you that if you think about the future, it can create anxiety. And yes, it can. That is a fact. But the way we want to think about the future is not how you would think about the future in most circumstances. This is where David Kessler's work on meaning, the sixth stage of grief, comes in. This is about thinking about the future that'll give you meaning, that'll give you purpose. We're actually going to do a whole segment on meaning and purpose. So how does one focus on the future? There's a wonderful poet who's written about it. He is one of my favorite poets. His name is Rabindranath Tagore. He won the Nobel Prize in Literature in the early 1900s. I believe it was 1912. And Yeats actually gave the foreword to his famous collection of poems called Gitanjali. Geet meaning song, Anjali meaning an offering, and they're all prayers. And this particular one-liner in his collection called Stray Birds says, "If you shed tears when you miss the sun, you also miss the stars." So if we stay focused on what is bothering us today, we're going to miss the future too, the immediate future. But the question is, what kind of immediate future are we talking about? I want to end this talk by reading from another book. In fact, there's two pieces that I want to read for you. One is from this ancient book by Mikhail Naimi called The Book of Mirdad. And this is where he writes about the focus on the future and what you could do in the service of others, which is essentially the message of David Kessler's book, meaning the sixth stage of grief. "You must be ever full that you may fill the wanting. You must be ever strong and steady that you may prop the wavering and the weak. You must be ever ready for the storm that you may shelter all the storm-tossed waves. You must be ever luminous that you may guide the walkers in the dark. The weak are burdens to the weak, but to the strong they are a pleasant charge. Seek out the weak. Their weakness is your strength. The hungry are but hunger to the hungry, but to the full they are a welcome outlet. Seek out the hungry. Your fullness is their want. The blind are stumbling blocks to the blind, but they are mileposts to the seeing. Seek out the blind. Their darkness is your light." Before I give you the prompt of the day, I want to read from another amazing book, The Purpose-Driven Life by Rick Warren. It's not a strange book to anyone who knows Dr. Rick Warren. As you know, he's a pastor in LA and has a deep, deep, deep faith in God. But he's also suffered a recent tragedy. Just like David Kessler, Dr. Warren also lost his son. I believe he was also 21 or 22 years old, very recently. So he has suffered grief also. On page 29, he cites a poem by Russell Kelfer, and I'll only read the 4 lines or 5 lines at the end. "Know that trauma you faced was not easy, and God wept that it hurt you so. But it was allowed to shape your heart so that into His likeness you would grow. You are who you are for a reason. You've been formed by the Master's rod. You are who you are, beloved, because there is a God." Now, whether you are a believer in God or you're not, the meaning of the passage is still very powerful. And that goes back to the concept of acceptance. Accepting that we are where we are, but that we can get past it. That this too shall pass, as the adage goes. So I want to leave you with this prompt. I will accept my grief and anxiety by, the action goes here, on how you're going to process it. And that could be journaling, it could be forest bathing, it could be the mindfulness, different exercises. Don't forget self-compassion, sitting quietly with yourself and being kind to yourself is a very important part of this prompt. That's all that's needed, is acknowledging right now. And the processing will come, it'll follow. I promise you that. Thank you for joining us today. Before you go, I'd like to tell you about two important things. First, a little bit about Karuna, and second, how you can be part of this journey with us. At Karuna, our mission is threefold. First, to support and empower youth and women who have suffered unspeakable abuse, neglect, abandonment, trafficking, and all of the traumas that life brings their way, unfortunately. Second, to support early childhood education in disadvantaged communities to help break the cycle of vicious poverty and abuse. And third, to fund well-being research through our esteemed scientific advisory board in areas that are disadvantaged. You can join us in one of 5 ways. They are listed on our website. So subscribe to this channel and subscribe to this website. You may volunteer with us, you can contribute, you can sponsor, you can be part of this journey to unleash compassion and make this world a happier place. Thank you.